Yeah, we're live. It is 7:08, a couple minutes late. And that rhymes. I'm a poet. I didn't even know it. I went to the state fair with my family today. It was awesome. We got to go on some very, some very cool rides. And mostly we went there, I think, for the food so that we could get big turkey legs and, cotton candy, gigantic 15-foot corn dogs, all of that stuff. So it was good. But I tried my hand at the loop on the string, and you have to stand the bottle up and get it to stand up. And obviously the guys that work there that have been doing for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, pick your number, they just stand it right up. And I was not able to do it. I tried it twice, and I got close, but I wasn't able to get exactly the procedure that you needed, the technique to get it to do that. My brother-in-law, though, walked up by the first time and just crushed it, won this gigantic minion, which is which was awesome. But it was a good time. We had a really good time. It was a fun deal. Tonight we're going to talk about the. So now I think I'm going to make one and practice like he did. So it's a good deal, because you want to win. But tonight we're going to talk about the box intake manifold, the upper intake. The photo that I have, the thumbnail that I have up, is a box R from TrickFlow from TFS. I have it on that particular one. I think we used on a 408 stroker. I also used on a 331 stroker, and we used it on boosted applications also, because that's why the box was originally designed, because the box loves boost. If you go back, and I'm sure that this all happened way before this, but if you even go back to the late 80s and early 90s, when the 5-liter craze was in full swing, we saw on the fuel injected motors, because the 5-liter intake manifold, the factory 5-liter, had a 2-piece intake design, had an upper and lower. So the first thing that they did was get rid of the runner length, the extra runner length, and the small common plenum that the factory 5-liter had. They got rid of that, and in its place they put a box. So it's basically just a big common plenum. The nice thing about some of them is that they had a couple of benefits. One, you could put a bigger throttle body on them, so that you could make on the box, you could make the throttle opening. You could size that for the throttle body that you wanted on there. Back then, we were doing 65, 70, and 75 millimeter throttle bodies, and then some, like this TrickFlow one, stepped all the way up to a 90 millimeter throttle body, which is one of the reasons that we liked it, especially on bigger motors like this 408 stroker. Because if you're going to try to build something that makes north of 500 all the way up into the 600 horsepower range with a stroker, a 408 or something, which is certainly possible and certainly even common even back then, because you had good cylinder heads, you had airflow research, you had TrickFlow heads and stuff. You had enough airflow, and you certainly had enough camshaft with available camshafts to make that kind of power. But you needed an intake manifold. If you're going to run an EFI intake manifold and not some sort of converted Victor Jr. Single plane four barrel style manifold, and converted for EFI, if you were going to run it fuel injected like this with a 2-piece intake manifold, having the box and having a big throttle body like this 90 millimeter was definitely a benefit. But if you take these box intake manifolds, and they made them originally, they made them to fit on the factory 5-liter lower intake manifold, so that they had that sort of mating for the lower intake manifold, the whole size. And then they also made them for GT40 stuff, Downs Ford and CarTech. And then, like with this TrickFlow one, they made them to fit their specific TrickFlow lower intake manifolds. So the question is, and even now, if we look now and see where there are instances where people don't make aftermarket intake manifolds, complete intake manifolds, Honda, the J series Honda is a perfect example. Guys are doing essentially doing this and making a common plenum upper for the factory lower. And what they're doing is, and what this 5-liter original version with Hartman or CarTech or Comp Cams, which was also Hartman, Downs, and the TrickFlow one, what they're doing is getting rid of the runner length in the upper intake manifold and replacing it with something that has much less runner length. So that does two things for the guys that don't understand what the intake manifolds do. And and way back then they were selling this as, you know, as a boost. This works good under boost. It's a boosted manifold. It needs boost. So if you're running a whatever, a Vortec or a Paxton or a Turbo or whatever, you put this manifold on, and the thing that it did do is it helped these motors rev. So you could make power at a higher engine speed than you could with a factory 5-liter intake manifold, which had two things going against it. One, the runner length was very long because it was a convoluted path. You know, the air had to go into the common plenum and then had to make a 180-degree turn into the runners, and then had lots of runner length to go through because it had to go back through the upper and then down through the lower and then through the lower into the cylinder head. So it had long runner length. And as we know, long runner length wants to enhance power production lower in the engine speed. And also, these runners were fairly small diameter in the factory 5-liter manifold. The GT40 and subsequent Cobra and all those were bigger and shorter. And then this box was even shorter still. So what the box did on the Ford stuff is that it got rid of a lot of the length of almost all of the runner length of the upper piece. And so by shortening it, it wants to tune the reflected wave. It wants to tune that for a higher engine speed. So, you know, these things like to rev. Guys would say that they were boosted manifolds, but in reality, and testing showed this many times way back in the day, because I had tested basically all of the Ford manifolds that were available. And testing back then shows the same thing that it shows now, is that when you get rid of that runner length, whether you do it on a V8 or 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, whatever it is, that it can pick up power at the top of the rev range because that's where it wants to optimize power production. But the problem is that the trade-off is always that you lose a bunch down low. And on some instances, if it's a drag race application, or you have done things to the rest of the motor to optimize it to also shift the power curve higher up. So if you put enough camshaft in it, and especially on a 5-liter application, it definitely would have needed cylinder head too. So if you put, you know, cylinder heads that would allow it to breathe up there, you put your cam timing it so it wants to make power up there, and then you combine it with the intake manifold that also wants to breathe up there, then you're going to push power up there and it's going to be effective. It's going to make power. It's still going to lose power down low compared to any kind of long runner intake manifold. So it always has to be a situation where, did the trade-off benefit you enough? Did you get enough of a gain from this kind of box deal on the 5-liter applications? Did you get enough of that on top to justify what you lost down low? Like in the case of a big stroker, like a 408, you have a whole bunch of extra low speed power anyway. And also you have a motor that needs more breathing. And so the trade-off is less there. You gain more than you lose. But on a little 5-liter, especially something with a small cam and stuff, because a lot of guys, the problem is a lot of guys were thinking that this was an intake upgrade, and then they would upgrade their intake. I'm going to get rid of that 5-liter HO because, you know, this is cool. And then they would go drive it, and especially in an automatic car, especially in a car that had like 273 gears in it, they would get in the throttle and just nothing would happen. So even if they had 10 or 20 or whatever more horsepower at 5,500 RPM or 6,000 or 6,500, wherever that they were trying to rev it to, the car was just a lot slower, and it was not fun to drive. And boost didn't help that. And that's the thing with this discussion on these intake manifolds, is the manifold still did what it did. And my point was, in looking at the 5-liter stuff, people are still doing this today. And the reason that they're doing it, like in the case of the J Series Honda, because there aren't 15 different intake manifolds available for that, despite the fact that that's a very, very popular V6 application. It works well under boost. There's lots of them in the wrecking yard. It has a lot of things going for it. And but replacing the upper intake manifold and changing the runner length with a common box like that, again, while it might help it rev, it's going to lose power down low, and it's going to not be effective even if you have boost, unless your goal is to take away power. And I have that discussion with people through the comments and at the shop at West Tech and stuff, where guys actually want to, and we've had this discussion about the difference between a turbo and a centrifugal blower. The perfect example of the rising boost curve, you know, the linear kind of rising boost curve of a centrifugal blower, and then a turbo that just comes up and then just kind of goes straight, assuming that you have proper control. And when you look at it on the dyno, you're like, oh yeah, the turbo is way better, except if you're dealing with traction issues where you have too much power and you're trying to put that down. And that's the argument for the guys that are drag racing. They're like, look, we like having more power, and you know, who's going to argue more power? But if we don't have the traction to put that down and we're having to manage the traction, it's a problem. And so that the same thing with this, with the big box intake manifold, big box upper intake manifold, it can do that and kind of artificially make the thing more like a centrifugal curve. And the same thing with the Honda application or other things. And it's a fairly easy, and the reason that it is popular for like the Honda, for other applications, is that it's something that most guys can build. If you were welding something together, assuming that you could TIG weld, you could make it out of, if you made a major upper intake manifold out of steel. But if you were TIGging it, for a guy to make a box that bolts onto a lower manifold is not that hard, because it's not a ultra complex deal that a guy has to figure out how to make. So if he can make a square box or a rounded box or whatever, and then put a throttle body on it, that's a pretty simple deal. And then voila, he has a new custom intake manifold. Now, the box isn't the only thing that people do this with. If you take a look at, because it's very, very common, if you guys are import guys, you're familiar with the Greddy intake manifold. So they make them for lots of different stuff. So basically what it is like for a 2J, for an RB, for a 4AG, for a 4G63, all of these motors, they all have the same thing in common. What they do is they make this pretty shaped common plenum with a throttle body mount, and they mount it onto a manifold that has runners that are this long, and it's all polished, and you know, it looks double throwdown and super cool. But the problem is, just with all of these applications, I know, because I'm going to test one on an RB just to show people, because I haven't seen people what, and the same thing with the L28, the inline 6-cylinder, or any other 6-cylinder, the 4200 Atlas, which is the video, which was in the video that I put up today. I made an adjustable manifold for that, for the same reason that mine looks more like a mailbox than the super cool Grady one. But the thing is, if you make that common plenum, which is our box, and then put it on short runners, it's going to do the same thing on all of these applications, whether it's an inline 6-cylinder, an inline 4-cylinder, whatever it is, it's going to do the same thing. And then there's always this balance we're talking about of a trade-off between, do I want to, for one, I'm trying to remember the name of the one, I think it was STR, made the box intake manifold that was very popular for Hondas way back in the day, for B series Hondas. And that's what it was. It was this box thing with short runners. And I'm like, have you guys, and people bought it. I mean, people loved it. They would put it on there, and it was the go-to thing. Oh, so, you know, good for boost. This is a boosted manifold. And I'm like, it's just a manifold. Have you guys ever tested it? Do you know how much power it makes? Oh yeah, this guy makes this amount of power with this kind of turbo on a B series. I'm like, yeah, but turbo B series make lots of power because you're running boost to a motor that's really good. I said, I want to know what that does versus something else. Oh, well, this guy runs 10s or 8s or 4s or whatever his number is. I'm like, yeah, you're not answering the question. So I got a hold of one and tested it. I'm like, it does exactly what we expected. First of all, Honda B series in particular, and the K series also, the factory manifolds are really good. So if you're testing a P30 intake or a Type R intake manifold, I've compared those two and show what they do, where the P30 is better for most of the curve, and then the Type R is better for the top end of the rev range. If you're going to make something better than those, you got to be pretty good at what you do. You're not going to weld together a box. I'm like, this thing was made because it's easy to weld together. It's easy to fabricate, and it looks good, which is, as it turned out, were two really good reasons for the 2 ways for them to grab market share because people bought it and it looked good, and it's like the fabricated manifold that we have that people buy, the sniper style fabricated manifold for LS motors. It loses power through most of the curve, but it fits under the hood. It looks good. It certainly looks better than the factory stuff, and it does pick up power at the top. This is the same thing. That was the 80s and 90s version of the sniper intake manifold just for the Honda, but it did the same thing when I tested. I'm like, look, it just loses power through most of the curve compared to the factory manifolds, and in that case didn't really gain much over the Honda deal. So that was the that was the box R for the Honda application, but they're doing it still for the, like I said, for the V6. For the Greddy thing is all of this is the same thing. And what I don't see, and when I go on the line, when I go online, I'm looking for stuff like that. I'm looking for data on, okay, here's I'll do a search on YouTube and go, okay, L28 intake manifold, because I see that they have custom intake manifolds done for them, and I'm like, intake manifold dyno test, and it's a guy walking over and his Z is on the dyno, and they go, oh yeah, it made a lot of power. I'm like, what? That's not a test. I need to see what it did before. I need to see what it did after. I need you to measure the intake manifolds. I need to tell me what the length is. I need to give you to give me all that information, and that's just not information. So that's again why I do what I do on the intake manifold stuff. So that's my spiel for tonight. If you guys, and so the box stuff obviously works, but there's no boosted manifolds. There's only just manifolds. The manifold is going to do what it does, and it's going to do the same thing NA. It's going to do the same thing under boost. It's that the manifolds do what they do. But go take a look at the video that I posted today. It's a comparison between the various 6-cylinder versions that I've tested up until now including the LV1, LV3. And so for me, the interesting thing is a comparison between the 4200 Atlas, the inline 6-cylinder, and the LV1, LV3 V6 4.3 liter. We got a 4.2 versus 4.3. We got an inline versus a V. We have a double overhead cam 4-valve motor versus a cam in block V6. We have a port injected versus a direct injected. So you have all kinds of things. Both of them have variable cam timing. I was surprised. The interesting thing is, though, if you look at the rated power outputs of these, the 4.3 liter, the LV1 and LV3 is actually rated slightly less horsepower, but more torque than the 4.2 liter. And when I tested them, the 4.2 liter didn't do what I expected anyway. I remember mentioning this way back when we first did it, that the 4.2 liter, the Atlas, is rated at, from the factory, of making more horsepower than torque. When I tested it on the dyno, we swept the variable cam time because we were able to control that thanks to the use of the MS3 Pro, harness that Mark supplied, and then the MS3 Pro ECU, because normally we use the Holley, but this worked out great, and we're able to dial this thing in. And so I thought we would have a different kind of power curve generated by this thing, and also that it would make more horsepower than torque. So maybe we didn't give the Atlas a fair shake. When I rerun it, we'll see what happens, because we'll try to rerun it in stock trim first, and then before we start adding boost to it. It did good. It made good power. It's just that it wasn't anywhere near what the LV3 did. And also, both of those were a good step up and a good bit better. And you could see that by the rated power outputs. Both of them are a big step up from the previous two. One of those being the 4.3 liter Vortec V6, and also the 4.3 liter V8, the L99, the little baby LT1. Both of those are rated at 200 horsepower. So predictably, they did fairly well. But again, even the difference between those two, the V8 made more power than the V6 is, despite the fact that they were both rated the same. And I ran aftermarket intake manifolds on both of them. I ran a carbureted intake manifold on the LT. Now, maybe it would have made better power, but there wasn't a big difference in power when I compared the LT1 intake manifold to the carbureted manifold. In fact, if anything, the carburetor probably was a little bit better on the L99. And we ran an Edelbrock and a carburetor on the 4.3 liter V6. the 4.3 liter V6 did not have headers. It had stock exhaust manifolds feeding a dual exhaust, and so that would have been down a little bit. But we saw a difference of over 30 horsepower, 35 horsepower or something. Compared the V8 compared to the 4.3 liter V6. The V6 was rated at 200 or 195, and it made 207. And normally they would make more than that on the engine dyno, but this thing was, it was all stock. The heads were stock, the camshaft was stock, the short block pistons, all of that stuff was the way that it came. All we did was rebuild it. So I don't know. That's why we test. Those wouldn't have been anywhere near the 290 horsepower and the 317 horsepower offered by the Atlas 4200 and then by the LV3. So it showed the succession of like steps, the evolutionary steps up the power curve that we now have generated. Because if you look at the power generated by the LV3, that's kind of V8 power now. I mean, a Cobra, a 4.6 4-valve Cobra didn't make those kinds of numbers. So it's, it's pretty impressive now, I think, what we're doing compared to what we have done in the past. So let's see what you guys are doing. So we're going to get our poll going here. Does the box intake manifold like boost? Everything likes boost. That's true. Carlove, have you seen my fabricated dual plenum sheet stainless intake with stack injection on the Ols? I doubt it's any good for power, but I wanted to experiment. I haven't. You should send me a photo of it. A billet mailbox. That's what the intake manifold is that I designed for the 4200. It looks like a mailbox. Dallas, I don't know what you mean by am I not interested in 420 on Super Cobra Jet head flow. I'm very interested in it. I'm just scrolling back and take a look at something. I helped build an inline 6 intake for 16 valve. We protruded the intake runners into the intake log, so into the plenum. Yeah, that works. That's how this one is like that. I almost always put a full radius air horn inside the plenum when we build the plenum, so that always works. The largemouth bass mailbox. One of the guys down my street, and I've seen it a couple of times now, he made his own mailbox, and it's two big CO2 cylinders, and he's cut a hole through one of them and made a cross out of them, and that's his mailbox, which is really, really kind of unique. I've never seen one like that before. I wish I had a Commodore in my garage. Lionel Richie and everything. I bet an actual mailbox as an intake upper would work and work well. Let's test the mailbox theory. It does work. That's what they used on the goldenrod. What about adding a dual quad lid for the box? We did that test. I have that test up, Nick, on the high ram. So we the nice thing about the high ram, it's convertible for the tops. So you can run a front mounted throttle body lid. You can run a dual quad. You can run a dual quad with EFI, and then a dual quad with carburetors. And then you have also a blank lid that they have that you can make whatever you want out of it. So you could put 6 throttle bodies on it, however you wanted to do it. I haven't seen the Steve Morse thing yet. I'll have to take a look at it. Would you entertain doing a spark plug test? The guys at Westech have done lots and lots of different, super trick plug manufacturers. And, but you want to do heat ranges? Start at a heat range 5 and work your way to 7, 9, or 10. You won't see a change in power from any of that because it will depend on what you're trying to test it on. Like if you're going to go to a 9 or 10, it would be what we would use on something that's running very, very high boost. We just do that more as a safety factor, not that it adds power. We're just trying to help minimize detonation. Buddy mine's mailbox is 2 steel 427 cranks welded together. That's cool. EV, you came back and responded to your own mention. That's good. Racing, what's the lesser of two evils on an engine? Heads are too big or the carb and intake is too big? Like how much too big? If either one of those are a little bit too big, it's not a problem. But having more head flow is always beneficial. So if I had to pick one of those being too much, the head would be the way to go. Does an E85 need a hotter heat range? I don't normally do that. We don't change the spark plug when we run E85 versus gas. Should I send my intake pictures via email? Yeah, if you have a picture of your intake manifold, I'd like to take a look at it. Just send it via email. Bob, Gen 6 454 off-road 4x4 wanting twin GT45. So that's going to be a lot of power. I mean, that's 1,400 or 1,500 horsepower with the turbos there. With a GM intake and a Holley HP, is there a reason this just won't work out with bigger injectors? No, it will. Are you using the Gen 6 EFI intake manifold? Looking for 800 to 900 horsepower. I would go smaller on the turbos if I was looking for that power range. But otherwise, no, you can blow through that EFI intake manifold. The sonoramic command enters. Or 30 inches. What is an L98 TPI runner? I don't know what the total length is on an L98. Is the TFS box art intake too big or big enough for 363? It's more than big enough. It's just that box R upper and lower will not make the power of other intake manifolds because I've compared it to lots of other things. The thing that makes the most power would be a tunnel ram. So I would bet that I would put money on, and having never tested it, but I've tested the Y-end tunnel ram on a small block Ford, and it does really, really well. So my guess is a high ram would make more power than the TFS Boxer upper and lower on a 363. Yeah, Dallas, just let me know. Larger diameter runners, I haven't done a big change in diameter, but I don't think that they're going to affect it nearly as much as the length does. Teach us about the Type R trick flow manifold. They make a Type R trick flow manifold? Jeff, when you saw your cams in a 5-liter Ford, you set them dot to dot. That's how I'd put them in. Whenever we're doing a test, I always put them in that way. I don't degree them, and I don't advance them, and I don't retard them. I put them in the way that 90, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9% of the people that would put a camshaft in that they bought from a supplier like Summit or whoever, the way that they would put it in. People that are building engines might be tempted to advance it or retard it. The camshaft, most of the factory or most of the cams you buy already have advanced ground into them, so there's no really reason to advance it unless you're trying to achieve something specific. And even then, you'd have to test it before you just put it in and do it. Racing, I don't know what epoxy you guys are using on their ported race intakes. It's probably the 2-part stuff. I was thinking of getting Vortec LS Swap EFI Supercharger Kit V3 SCI LS Truck Fiat. That's a good kit. I have lots of tests up on it, and I'm glad that they had finally, after years of me poking them with a stick, that they decided to base one of their kits off of the engine that you see in the junkyard 1,000 or 10,000 to 1 over the one that they're originally doing with. Oh, we got to do it with a Corvette one. Yeah, great. You and 2 other people that have that motor that can afford an LS3. Whereas thousands and thousands of people have a 4.8, a 5.3, a 6.0 truck motor. Aaron, someone mentioned spark plug testing, but only talked about heat range. What about indexing plug? Indexing the plugs, like to change the opening of the plug gap toward some position of the chamber. I've never seen power from that. We have needed to index plugs because of combustion chamber and usually piston dome design, because you've got to notch out an opening really for the electrode, and so they would index it so that they have clearance with the plug, so that the plug goes in the right way, because they don't want to, if you cut into the dome of the piston, you're taking away compression. They don't want to do that, so they want to do as little as they can. So indexing the plug also helps them do that. I have not seen power from indexing it by just doing it on a normal motor. Dallas, if things work out, I'd like to have a Dyno test on a complete stock engine. Really like your information and like what you're doing. I'd love to run a Super Cobra jet if you have that. That would be awesome. Dan is recommending a 788 Splashstone epoxy for port work. DevCon was the thing that I was thinking of that people were using, but I don't know what modern stuff is. Have you done any tests on rotating weight and recorded them? Yes. I haven't done a video on it, but I have done tests on the easiest way for us to do it. You can do it with changes in, crankshaft weight, or, trimming the counterweights, lightweight rods and pistons, and all that helps. And we know that does, because the test that I did is at West Tech. The way that we run the engines on the dynos, we put a flywheel on it. Sometimes we use a flex plate, but put a flywheel on it and a drive plate. For some applications, we have a steel flywheel and a steel drive plate, depending on the power level. We normally use the steel stuff. We also have aluminum versions. And when you run the aluminum version versus the steel version, the aluminum version makes more power. It's lighter, it spins up faster, even though and you would see that more probably on an inertia test, but you also see it on a loaded test the way that we run it. And you'd also see it differently if we change the rate of acceleration, which we can do, but normally we will run at 300 RPM per second. Mr. 2, did you have a question about your camshaft? I see the specs up there. Colin, doing an L33 build running twin 6163 is the best way to size and select injectors. You need to select your injector based on two things. One is the amount of power that you're making. So if you are trying to make 1,000 horsepower, you need to have 1,000 horsepower worth of fuel. And if you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with the E85, you need to have even more fuel flow. So the injectors have to be big enough to supply the amount of fuel that you're making. The other thing that they have to do is they have to fit whatever combination of intake manifold and fuel rail that you have. So for the stuff that we're doing on the dyno, a lot of times, like for instance, we run a truck LS intake manifold on lots and lots of stuff. We have it. It came with the motor that we pulled from the wrecking yard. It's easy to use. We'll run the factory rail on that, because the factory rail will feed 90% or more of the things that we're running on there, even boosted. And then a lot of times the most common one that we use is like it's a Bosch style. It's an 80-pound Deca injector XL. Lots of different people make them. The thing is that that's a lot longer than the factory truck manifold is. I mean, than the factory truck intake or injector is. But we don't care. So we'll put those in and put the rail down, put all the injectors in place. And then what happens is the mount that you run the bolt through on the intake manifold to secure the rail is this much away from the pad. So we just use the spacers and a longer bolt. So you can do that if you're trying to figure out if the injector that you have isn't an exact fit. Otherwise, the injector needs to be the right length to make sure that when you're putting your rail on, that the rail, however it's bolted to the intake manifold, is normally the way that they do it. So that bolts on correctly if you want to do that. Like for us, like I said, we don't care about using spacers and stuff. We'll just make that happen. Whatever has to happen, we'll make it happen so that we can get the test done. I still have super clippers at head support and polish, 514 big block Ford Eagle rods, crank, Ross pistons, set it out, 1250 Dominator, 100cc jets all around. Still want more. Good. Yes, he's seeking 700 horsepower with an LS3 stock Chevy ZL1 blower and a 2.5 top pulley. Oh, almost any aftermarket camshaft would be able to do that. For calculating the power output, the easy way to do it for an NA motor is to multiply whatever the injector flow is by times 16, and that will tell you how much power they'll support. So for instance, a 50-pound injector, and I should just do a scale for people, it'd be a lot easier. 50-pound injector will support 800 horsepower, right? Yeah. So that gives you an idea. So obviously a 100-pound injector would support 1600 horsepower, but that's NA. Problem is that you're going to use a lot more fuel than that when you're running it boosted. So I like to multiply that number by, I don't know, 0.85 or something for a boosted application, and then times 0.75 for a E85 combination. Does the box intake manifold like boost? 91% saying yes. Gotta love the boost. The box loves the boost. Crash. Have a good night. On a Mustang 6 integral cast intake manifold, where does the runner start and what is the plenum area? I don't know. I have no idea what year Mustang that is, or what engine it is, or so I can't even really look at it and maybe start to have a guess. The plenum starts at the end of the intake manifold, or the end of the runner. Carts. I have a 6-liter 823 heads with LS7 lifters, CHE trunnion kit, LS3 intake valves, and exhaust valves. Good. So those are the lightweight valves. Melling oil pump, 45-pound injectors, 6.2 truck intake with an 85mm throttle body. So are you asking what camshaft you should run on that? So you could take a look at the video that I have up where I ran a bunch of camshafts on a 6-liter. And you can kind of judge, pick which one you like. Do injectors flow less for boost due to the boost blocking them? Yes and no. If you don't have the boost referenced so that you have the same delta, so that you're raising the fuel pressure in relation to boost, then if you do that, then there's no change in the injector flow. You're not doing it because of injector flow. You're doing it mostly because the multiplier is mostly because when you're running it under boost, you're running it at 11 or 11.5 to 1. And when you're running it NA, you're running at 12.5 or 13 to 1. And so it requires more fuel to make the same amount of power under boost. If you already have the TFSR upper, is it really worth it to buy the box? I mean, it's ridiculous as it is with the Vortec. Yeah, don't worry about it. I've compared the TFSR versus the box. I thought that I had that video up. I know that I did the test long ago, but that becomes the thing. Is it worth it? Even if you have a gain. Troll, the 1960-1983 small Ford products, 144, 170, 200, 250. Are you talking about the little inline 6-cylinders? Not little, but inline 6-cylinders. Have you ever heard of a device called a turbine diverter valve? No. Is it changing flow to or from the hot side of the turbo? KR, the boosted doesn't have more parasitic loss necessarily. It would if it has a supercharger on it and it's driving the supercharger, then it would have parasitic loss. I would argue that a turbo doesn't have that, but you're changing the air fuel ratio that you use. You're using a lot more fuel to make, and you're making more power, but your brake specific is worse on a supercharged motor or a turbocharged motor than it is on an NA motor. They're using some of the fuel for cooling. $4,500 for titanium rods? That's a lot. you have any experience with old quick spool valves? I've never run a quick spool valve test. Sounds like a blower cam. Stud girdle bars is a must. My supercritical head springs, 10,000 titanium valve springs, interchange with my race partner, $3 Chevy aluminum heads. You ever considered a Tesla turbine as a plausible turbo? Is that the electric motor? Has anyone made 500 wheel horsepower on a box R? And if you're talking about naturally aspirated, I haven't done that. Well, probably we have. We might have done 600 horsepower NA, but boosted, that's obviously fairly easy. I'm running a stage 1 BTR cam my setup. I was thinking about adding the poor man's Vortex. I think also look at the, if you're looking at that, see how that compares to, I think, doesn't Torxarm also offer a kit for the truck? Turbine diverter valve. Oh, so that's like a quick spool valve then. Tesla turbine is an air or water pump with flat blades. It's 98% efficient. Cool, I'll have to take a look at it. A small inline 6, 2 center ports are short. Does the runner length for the other ports start where the center ports stop, or do the ports measure from the common length tube-wise? It's not uncommon for inline 6 cylinders. A good example of that is going to be the slant 6 Dodge. There are a lot of 6 cylinders, especially ones that were carbureted, where they would route all of the 292 to a lesser extent, but they are different also, but they're Siamese though. So the center branch, especially if the carburetor is in the center branch is almost always shorter, and then the outer ones are longer. So maybe the Ford's like that. I'm just not as familiar with the Ford, but the runners will stop, and then there'll be some kind of common plenum. So you probably have shorter ones and then longer outer ones. And it's not, like I said, it's not uncommon for the OEMs to have done that, to make them not all the same. Vortex V3 SI swap on my car. Got it on sale for $3,500 shipped. Nice. Dan, you still have a set of titanium Porsche rods? Those are not cheap. I think my NSX had titanium rods on it too. Thanks, Plexidust. Why not try a gigantic gigabox intake with no runners? Like the Keglidon was like that? Yeah, the LS7s were titanium rods. Richard, racing. I don't know a GTX 4088R. I don't know that I've ever seen one in person. Aaron, you should get a 318 Magnum block, a 4-inch stroker crank, LS1 573927 bore pistons, and 5.7 Hemi rods, and make a cheap 388 stroker. Do you have to get a custom stroker crank to make that work? Or are the Hemi rods the right width for that and the right journal diameter? Michael, you don't need knowledge to vote. That should be a t-shirt. Oh. Jose, happy to help. Top fuel dragsters monitor boost per cylinder to see what the supercharger is distributing boost equally. I'm sure that's distributing. Aaron, the off-the-shelf parts work, just need to grind off rod bolts for clearance. The bottom that's there on the block. Okay. So KR, I see you're not a data guy. Building a 5-liter right now with your Jedi knowledge. Yeah, Travis, this one's doing good. 93% of does the box R intake like boost? 93% are saying yes. I guess we could have put almost anything up there, really. Imagine if you had a 5-inch bore and a 1.5-inch stroke. That'd be a really big piston, right? The Z06 has titanium intake valves. That's right. Does the and I think don't those don't the LS7 heads also have? Do they have lash caps on them also from the factory? I thought that they did. Most of the titanium valves will have that, so you don't hammer the top of the valve. (1996) LT4 had sodium-filled valves. Will 202 heads work on a low compression dish piston? 78302. I don't know. I don't know enough about what the factory pistons look like and where the dishes are relative to what that valve size and what head you're working with. So I can't really answer that. You just have to test it. EB, what's the best LS Canada daily in a 6-liter with a factory torque converter? I don't know what you mean by best. The Trek Norris cam is pretty good for a 6-liter, and on a 6-liter, it definitely would work with a factory torque converter. GMC Typhoon and Cyclone intake is similar to the box, and it works well. Cigar and Whiskey's at. The Cigar and Whiskey is gone, so thanks for the stream. All right, man, take it easy. I don't know about what GM engines, but they would have latch caps because most manufacturers don't have roller tip rockers before 2010. I know that I know that they hardened the tips of them too, but for some reason I remember seeing lash caps on when I was doing all the LS7 head tests. No lash caps for factory GM engines, okay. Richard, do you have a current favorite of the 4.3 and 4.2 engines? No, I want to do more testing actually on all of them. I'm anxious to get the 4200 back together and do more testing on that. I really liked when I put together the Vortec one. I want to do the original, the OG 4.3 meter, the 3/4 of a V8. I also want to do the 302 version of that L99. Then of course the LV3. All of these need boost. I've run boost on 2 of them, but they all need to have boost. Richard, have you ever seen a Motec CDL3 display in person? I don't think so. I've seen some Motec displays that they have on the trophy trucks and things that people have brought into Westec, but I don't know if it's a CDL3. I don't know what that is. Chase, what maximum compression, dynamic compression would you recommend for a turbo LS for 800 crank horsepower? I wouldn't ever recommend a maximum. My recommendation would be not to go anywhere near that. My recommendation would be if you're looking for an LS that make 800 horsepower and pump gas, it should be low compression. and it's going to be easy to do because you just put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it and build an LS of almost any size. The bigger that you make it, the easier it's going to be. And there's like 1,000 different camshafts that you could use and just run the boost up. So a cammed LS with almost anything is going to work. Yeah, Grooves, the 4.3 liter was pretty stout. It makes me wonder whether the 4200 was not showing exactly what it could have. The thing was shooting oil up out of everywhere. So I don't know if it was I haven't only run one. I only have that one to gauge it on, but I'm kind of thinking that maybe there should be more power there. What's the deal with the torque storm? Is it like a Vortec curve? No, it's the torque storm is a centrifugal, just like a Vortex, so it's going to have a similar boost curve. Dallas, Uncle Tony's he's obviously entertaining and he has a very successful channel, so kudos to him. But he's not really an engine guy. Nobody ported a 4200 head. The guys from what was it, Boosted Boys or one of those guys did one for Calvin. CDL3 display was common display used back in GT1. I know for sure the Ford GT1 had possibly the Nissan GTR, Maserati MC12. The 6.2 Ford is the most slept on performance. I don't know what that is. That's pretty cool though. Did the cam swap the LV1 and dyno it? Yes, they did. That video is up. Brian Tui have a cam that they did for that little V6 and it worked good. Have you done any flat engines on the dyno? No, I have not. I've never run a VW on the engine dyno, or Porsche, or Subaru, or a Ferrari Boxer. Jace, I've got a 6-liter LS2 right now, ported 243 heads, but plan on swapping out the pistons, rods, crankshaft, and camshaft to optimize the turbo set. You don't really need to do that. If you have that motor right there, and you put ring gap in it, and you put if it has a stock camshaft in it, that will work. But if you put any kind of other aftermarket camshaft in there and put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it, you'd have a 1,000 horsepower turbo motor. Also, for the other guys, L67 possible rear-wheel drive transmission options for T5. T5 would be okay, but you probably with a turbo L67, you could make more power than a Ford T5 would be able to take. You can make big power on a stock LS2, as long as big power means like 1,000 horsepower and less. Do you prefer high compression, low boost, or low compression, high boost? That isn't a choice that I would make. I would just add a turbo to whatever engine I have. If it has high compression, we could do that. You just need to have enough static compression or enough octane to be able to do that. You ever seen her run an Ack Miller twin turbo setup for a big block blow through box? No, I don't know what he would have been. He was kind of famous for running propane stuff, but otherwise, any twin turbo setup blowing into a box, we've done that a lot with the Vortex stuff. An enclosure for the carburetor or a bonnet on top of it, like the CSU stuff. What's it like working with Freiberger? That guy's one of the hardest workers in the industry. That guy's on the go more than anybody that I know. And him and Dulcich are both great guys and really super knowledgeable about a lot of stuff. Jace, yeah, sometimes fitting the 1,000 horsepower with the turbo stuff in the engine bay is the problem. Prep ring gap on a stock LS hoot for 10 pounds. Yes, I always recommend ring gap. Berliner Boxer 12-cylinder would be a sweet dyno. It would be cool. When I first started working on staff for All Chevy way back when, the owner of the Tom McMullen, the owner of the company, had a Ferrari Boxer. and because he wanted people to know that it was a Ferrari Boxer, like, I don't know, people wouldn't know that, he had somebody write Boxer on both sides. I'm like, oh man, it's a really cool car. But it doesn't need that. So we're going to go ahead and close out our does the box intake manifold like boost? 92% saying yes and 8% saying no. So apparently 92%, that's a big number. With carbs on top. So twin draw throughs. Gail Banks did stuff like that too. Jeff, the guys at BTR do very good work. After looking at the trophy 4-cylinder on eBay, I don't know how you're going to hook it up to the dyno. We'll make it work. Yeah, the Porsche engines were small compared to the 5.4 liter or 5 liter. They were small compared to the other Can-Am stuff, but they did have two little spinny things on them. Do you know if there's ever a Kenny Bell kit for small block Ford? Yes, and they've reintroduced it. It's still available. Yeah, Zach. It's all good to have the can-do attitude until you're actually presented with the problem, and then you go, I don't know if attitude alone is going to be enough to make that work. One more minute. So everybody make sure that you already gone to take a look at the video that I put up on the V6 and the inline 6 and the V8 and then the other V6. Yeah, the Kenny Bell 5-liter kit was the first kit that they came out with. It's a non-intercooled, but it's the one where I did a bunch of testing with them. That's when they first started introducing the big inlets into the blower. So before, they had a setup that would accept the stock throttle body or a 65 millimeter throttle body, and then they got the good idea to make their I think that they were Mammoth intake manifolds, or no, they called them Blowzillas or Flowzillas back then. So they had to make big inlets going into the blower because obviously the only thing better than a 65 or 70 or 75 millimeter throttle body is an inlet system going into the blower with a 90 millimeter throttle body. And then subsequently they've gone up from there. Back then they were really spinning the little 1.5 blowers, trying to spin them really fast. And then they made the 2 liter or 2.1 liter blower. And obviously that had a big effect, a big positive effect on the power potential. Richard, you like Fox bodies? Have you ever tested an On3 turbo kit? I never tested a specific turbo kit other than a CX Racing one, I think, for a 5-liter, but it didn't fit very well. No, I take that back. I have tested one other turbo kit directly for a Fox body, and that was the guy's HP Performance, my buddy Jimmy. And we ran that kit over and over and over again. We ran on 351s. We ran on all kinds of stuff, and it worked good. So as long as all the exhaust is going to the turbo, then it's just, and you have a wastegate that works, then it's just a function of sizing the turbo for whatever kind of power output you want. Dallas, yeah, let me know. Just contact me and we'll see what's up. So you have an Allison 1650 dyno put out over 2,500 foot-pounds of torque at 2,500 RPM. That's a lot. John, my heads are cast iron Super Cobra jets. Cool. I think we're wanting to airflow test stock ones. KR, there's a way to express yourself, and then there's a way not to do that. So we're a little friendlier here. Yeah, Dan, the driver's feet are in front of the wheels on the 917. And then they also had pressure gauges on the cage. All of the all of the structure basically, so they could figure out whether when, not if, when it cracked. The boosted box intake, does large volume help turboing? No, it doesn't. What size wastegate would you recommend for a 6-liter? The one that we use twin 45s, but probably like a 60 or a 55 would be better. Casey, what happened to the 3800 heads? I haven't heard from Turbo Bonds in a while. Richard, I wanted to get your input on max timing and what RPM do you recommend ramping it up? I have a 6.1 Hemi. I'm not really a tuner. All I can do is show you what we did on the engine dyno. I don't know how well it's going to translate to your combination because we find that out on the dyno on what works best. Does pressure defy exhaust outlet? I don't like header and larger tube exhaust necessary for the turbo. The exhaust after the turbo, super critical. Big as you can after the turbo. Before the turbo, less critical. Do you have, and this will be the last one for tonight, do you have a cold air video with different sizes, 3.5, 4, 5 for GM 662 vehicles? I'm wondering if a 5-inch cold air intake is worth it. It's not. It's not going to be any better than a 4-inch. I did, and I haven't ever done a video on it only because I didn't get any results. I tried a bunch of, lucky for me, I have a whole bunch of 3, 3.5, 4, and I don't know. I don't have anything that's 5-inch because 5-inch is going to be way bigger than the inlet going into the throttle body. So we didn't worry about that. But we tried a bunch of different, I tried a bunch of different lengths and diameters in front of the throttle body and saw very little difference in power. So nothing that I thought we were going to, because when we do cold air intakes, like on a 4-cylinder Honda motor or whatever, the cold air intake definitely affects power because we've done that test over and over and over again. And I was hoping that we know a radius entry on the throttle body of an Ellis when we run on the dyno makes power. And so I was hoping that the air inlet system itself would also do something. And because I had all this aluminum tubing around, I could make my own. And because of the front of the dyno has plenty of room, I could do whatever I wanted with it. And so I tried a bunch of different things, and it just didn't really change the power. So I was kind of disappointed I didn't even do the video on it. Can I run a blow-through carb on my high compression big block Ford? Yes. You just need the right combination of octane and compression and boost and timing, and that will work. Overbuild. I've not done a Porsche 928 engine, although I do like those. Ferrari had some wild ideas. They do some really cool stuff. I have some really good Ferrari technical books on their F1 stuff up there, and then also Ferrari through the ages of their different cars. I need to get some stuff on their more modern things. So most of the stuff I had stopped at like F40 or F50 kind of thing, and so I need to look at their more modern stuff, which I'm sure is even more impressive. So on that note, I've got to get going. Thank you guys all for showing up. and I will see you guys all tomorrow. I have taken my poll down. We're all good. And end stream, and I'm out. Boom.